Hi everyone. So my assignment is a little bit late. I actually fell a little bit behind in some personal matters, so now I'm just submitting my video. So I'm gonna do this nice, short, and quick. On my right side here in the computer, sorry, my computer is very messy. There is my assessment and materials package. So first thing first, a little bit about my module. What I have is refugee youth applying for high school graduation, and they are looking to collect volunteer hours. It's a theme that I've used in so many of my classes with you guys. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it. So what's happening is that in order to graduate, refugee youth from the Middle East who have received interrupted education have basically been educated in British international schools in their home country. So they have some good understanding about the English language. But the difficulty that I've noticed when they're completing, when one student that I got to complete the assessments sort of showed in the assessments and the assignments is that they are having a difficult time transferring their knowledge as per socio-cultural background to the social fabric of Canada. So they're basically completing all the assignments from a perspective that is not really aligned with the way things work here. So moving forward, that's sort of like the background. So I've selected a needs assessment to begin with. So it's important to acknowledge that all these assessments are going to be part of the student's portfolio, but most importantly, there are also skill-based activities that are going to be incorporated into the portfolio alongside the assessments. The first is a needs assessment where I had the students that were at CLB level 5 as reported to tick off the most interesting 3 topics to them, and then the most interesting 3 tasks, and then sort of write down here some phrases that would sort of showcase how they want to achieve those tasks or those themes. So if I was to go into here and pull out an example of a needs assessment that was complete, it's a little bit difficult to see, but I've highlighted what they ticked off, and then they had a chance to sort of write down a few phrases with regards to, I'm just trying to find the phrases, with regards to how they want to achieve those goals. So if I was to zoom into here, it says, listen and understand my supervisor, read the information to help me, fill out the material my supervisor gives, and practice and practice. So it's very vague, the way that they've described their desire to achieve areas that they've ticked off is very, very vague. It's very redundant and repetitive when they say practice. I've seen that a lot in their materials, and a lot of emphasis on the supervisor's instructions, which may be a good thing, and also a lot of words without contextual information like understand or fill out. And yeah, so that was my experience in one student's needs assessment from this class who volunteered to support me in completing this assignment of mine. Another example is like when they're speaking fluently, practice speaking, make sure I get the job. Another theme that I really saw in their assignments is that they really confused volunteer role with a job. So when I debriefed with them after on their assignments, they said that to me, and I asked them why, and they said that it's because in our home country, a job and a volunteer role are like the same thing. Or known to be the same thing, and pay isn't really acknowledged as a part of it. So I thought that was really interesting. Anyways, moving forward, here is the placement assessment. So for the placement assessment, I did it so that I would know where to place these students. So they were to listen to a sample interview as a listening task, complete a reading task, complete a speaking task, and complete a writing task as per their reported CLB levels. So if I was to go into their formative assessment and go into the materials 1, they did listen to a sample interview and record their main ideas. So again, very vague. Girl Scouts try new things. Girl Scouts has leaders. Learn new things. And a lot of the information was taken from the video with regards to words that are more difficult, like role models. And yeah, so I mean, it's still quite redundant and very, very vague, as if they were doing the job, doing the assignment just to get it over with. So, for example, if we were to go down, I'm not going to show you guys all of it, but when they did the reading, they were to read a description of a volunteer agency and role under this link here, and write down what skills or traits they need. So they really confused traits, skills, roles, sort of clumped it all together in saying like volunteer career mentor. They're not really sure when I debriefed with them what's the difference between a volunteer and a career mentor or a youth care counselor. So it's sort of problematic to have them realize that they can volunteer as a youth care counselor, but they really can't. Youth care counselor would just be roles available on the website, but with a lot more requirements. So they really didn't read into that. They just sort of took the surface level information and wrote it down. And for example, list 3 skills you have which will transfer to this position. They frequently wrote helper, and I always ask them, like when I debriefed with them, what exactly does helper mean? And so they just said that I help everybody and I help them to do their best. There was also an emphasis on the word best, but let's go into that later. So they did the speaking and they did the writing, and then these are the materials that I allowed them to do so I could assess them on these skills. So like listen to a sample interview for listening, I provided them with the interview source. Reading, I provided them with the descriptive links. So the reason I put in a lot of like link-based and online tech-based links here for them to refer to is as per the teacher's recommendation. She said that they're very keen to conduct activities that involve like a computer or hands-on work. So yeah, that was the reason for that. So I moved on forward. This is still the formative assessment, and I moved on forward to the formative assessment. And in this assessment, again, I've had them complete 4 different tasks under the different skills. So listening, reading, and writing, and speaking as well, which is here. So when I noticed the way they did this, oh, I actually confused my placement assessment, my formative assessment, but that's okay. So this was really, really interesting because in my assessment scale, I was able to comment and then they were able to comment. So, for example, when they did the first task, which is to the listening task, I sort of gave them ratings as per this scale on the top. And then I was able to put down my comments, but then they put down their comments beside that. And they actually left quite a few times the blanks empty. I think that's because they just didn't know what exactly I'm looking for in the competencies. So it would help when if it would really have helped if I was to simplify this information and competencies so that they were able to understand as well. Because in this scale, I'm not the only one who's marking. They're also marking. So that would have been of huge help. But that's okay. So for the future plan, that was mostly me, where I could write down how I'd want to use this information to support them further. So that's the way we sort of did the formative assessment. And then again, I provided them with supplementary material so that they were able to do the assignments for the assessment, and then I could assess them. So like a personal letter template, I think I have that here. This was really interesting, where they had to write a letter to an agency, and they were able to sort of copy the format I gave to them. But it's very redundant. So, dear manager, I'm born in Syria. I have worked with my father, which was a really big way of self-describing in the whole assessment package. They wrote about working with their father and went to school and want to work in a successful company. Another very common phrase, successful. I think that's also based on sociocultural norms, to always be the best and to always be with the most successful. I like to help people, and again, you can see do my best effort in this job. So I actually think they're not able to make clear differentiation between job and volunteer work. So if anything, there would need to be more context provided to them for that. So summative assessment is also sort of, I followed the same template. So I had them do 5 tasks, and here I was able to evaluate them on the spot through a checklist. So if I was to go into here and pull out like summative assessment, we can see here that I've sort of been able to evaluate them as soon as they completed the task above. So I wrote down here a scaling system to elaborate would have been useful because it was a very holistic assessment. I was able to knock down here what they did right, well, what they got done, let's say. But then I wasn't really able to provide a context around it, like how well they did or what was missing or anything of the sort. So when I did have to sort of write down points for all of these in the other comments. So learner was able to identify the above on a minimal level, but not entirely. The learner was able to identify partial ideas only without much relevance to real life context. So it would have really helped if I was to provide some space there to make comments on every skill. So moving forward, that was sort of the summative assessment where for different tasks they completed them, and then I was able to sort of like this, comment on their performance right away. So for the self and peer assessment, I had a teacher make sure that they weren't doing the tasks alone. So the tasks were repetitive. They were the same tasks they did during placement. But then they were done now again as a self and peer assessment later on in the course. So the students sort of had the opportunity to reflect upon their performance during placement time and upon their performance now, and this time with a peer. So they had to complete these tasks and then rate themselves based on the skill, and then their peer would rate them and then provide feedback. So in this simulation, however, just because I was very limited in my resources, I didn't actually have a peer to watch them, but I watched them conduct this activity, and anything that I was missing, I consulted with the teacher for that. So if I was to go into it, you can just see here, they've rated themselves, and then I've got the chance to rate them, and then I've commented on what my feedback is. Typically, this would be done by a peer. So unfortunately, missed the opportunity for that. So that was sort of self and peer assessment, and I also did not get them to do the instructor evaluation because they spent very little time with me. But the instructor evaluation would look like this. I have a rating key here. I have a rating opportunity for rating here, and then comments here by the student, and then just a brief list of common evaluation points that I got from the internet some time back. So when if the students actually conducted this activity as a large class, they would practice speaking and vocabulary. So they would create vocabulary cards and engage with each other by speaking and write down the students that matched every one of these traits. Unfortunately, this situation didn't allow for that, so I did have them complete just one vocabulary and reading skill material activity to incorporate in their portfolio. So for this activity, they had to take these words and match them to the pictures here, and then they were to name the silent letters for every word and then translate an English word into their translation, just so I could pay some attention to how they interpret information based on their sociocultural background, which is quite relevant in this specific opportunity. So, well, with a specific group. For example, so they put note taker, office assistant, and greeter, and these were all in the wrong order. So the greeter was actually here, and the note taker is actually here, and then the office assistant is here. So I was able to sort of tell them more about how I've graded them in person, but it was more like a, let's say just a check mark, a completion mark that I was to give them due to limited time. So here they identified some silent letters that were said, when they spoke words like social media, they identified the C and E as silent. And then for translation activity, they weren't really sure because they didn't know how to write in Arabic. So they put question marks here, but they did identify the 3 pictures accurately as per the word bank. So this is just material they could use in their portfolio as ways to strengthen the assignments for the other assessments, like all the way from needs assessment to summative assessment to self and peer assessment. So I just wanted to give them additional material to that they could work on sort of intra assignments. So I'd be using this as per my discretion to sort of divvy up the assignments for assessment purposes and allow them to develop their skill sets in the middle of completing the entire assessment package. So yeah, that's the overall assessment and materials package that I've done, and I'm sure I hope that we're able to put all of our material online so that we are able to access each other's resources and be able to use them in our teaching. I also created a learner record sheet of this sort where I put down the needs assessment to the skill-based activities and then their CLB levels that they're supposed to be at with a dark X, and then the light X for the CLB levels that I thought they were at. This scale would have been a little bit more intricate if I created some room for explaining why I think they're at that certain CLB level, rather than just placing them there and having a conversation with them about it. So I think that this scale is missing that component. Anyways, thank you guys so much for listening to my presentation, and I know it's pretty lengthy, so I decided to focus in only on one student who completed my material. So I'm going to be uploading this for you guys, and hopefully this has made some sense. Thank you so